Welcome back, everybody, to Unfiltered Vet Discussions. My name is Kelly, and I'm being joined today by Beth, Peter, and Phil. You can see more about us at unfilteredvetdiscussions.com. You can also find us on various social media platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram. Facebook, the huge, as well as like Spotify, Google, Apple, and other podcast platforms. Please like and subscribe and join us. We do drop a new episode every Friday. So we'd love to hear from you all and enjoy the conversations because we actually do have a lot of fun on this. So today's topic is adding a new kid to the mix in the practice. What does that do to the organizational structure? Is it a smooth conversation? Is it a deer in headlights? What does that look like for every business who is listening? Peter, I'm going to throw it to you to open up the conversation.
Well, thank you, Kelly. And the conversation came up because we have added a new kid to our block in Dr. Beth. And, you know, Dr. Beth and I had never met before. Kelly and Beth had never met before. So there was a commonality with many of the members of the team who've been working together to record these podcasts for months. And now we have to learn the nuances of a new person. And yeah, podcasts are one thing, and we're all virtual from that standpoint, but just having been in clinical practice and own my own hospital and Phil in your world and Beth in your world and Kelly in your world, we get comfortable with the group of people. And whether it's because somebody leaves or you're growing and you need to add somebody, all of a sudden that status quo gets disrupted by adding somebody to the team. And there is a change in the effectiveness and performance when you add somebody. And how well you add somebody and how we go through the process of adding people can have a tremendous impact on efficiency, effectiveness, and productivity. And so it just brought to mind when we added our new kid on the block here that it probably is an interesting conversation. And Phil, because of your right brain approach to things, probably an interesting conversation from your standpoint in terms of what you see from a leadership standpoint anytime you add a new M&M to the bag of M&Ms.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so from a business perspective, from an operations perspective, that first 2 weeks is critical. So if we onboard somebody effectively, and that's a term. So Beth will say, what do you consider effective onboarding? What are some of the elements of that? Like if I'm coming onto your team?
Yeah, so we actually have what we call our training team. So it's a small group of people with a representative from each area of the hospital that's a part of the process when we onboard someone.
Okay.
So that team is the people who work with them for those first few weeks. And so usually it's like a staged process of they come in and they sit down with my practice manager, Kira, and she shows them all of the behind the scenes stuff. And then they shadow for like 2 to 3 weeks where I call them, they're not a real person yet, where they're just sort of hanging out with somebody and like learning the ropes and learning how we do things and using our practice management software. And then as they get comfortable, usually after about 3 to 4 weeks, then they're put into an actual role and an actual shift. And obviously there's like a lot more to it than that, but that's like sort of the gist of how we do it. So they have a very structured set of procedures that they follow. And then we also have like proficiency checklists to see what things they know how to do, what things they don't. So then we can target training to see where they are. And then also how can we advance them once they're comfortable and settled in.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I heard there that are really impactful. So one is that if I'm coming on board, is that I feel like I have somebody that can be my advocate, is that I have somebody that I feel comfortable with. And that's also, we want to make sure that training team, that they're trained in how to train, that they're of the mind where, you know, we don't have that curse of knowledge. Like, what are you kidding me? You don't know how to do this? You know, is that, are we asking, you know, positive and affirmative questions? Are we creating, you know, we use that term psychological safety. Like when I come on board, do I feel like that? And the bottom line is that, do I feel like I matter? Do I feel like this team wants me to be successful? And so clear, you know, some of the other things that I heard was there's clarity around what the expectations for me are, you know, in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Because uncertainty, volatility, there's always going to be volatility in an animal hospital, but can we minimize some of that uncertainty as to what I'm responsible for when I come on board? And, you know, and I know y'all do a really good job of that. And those first 2 weeks are there was a study that was done, an effective, you know, what, however we want to describe it as effective, but an effective onboarding process where I feel like I'm part of that team increases retention, not quite exponentially, but that it keeps me as part of the team. Where if I come in and I'm, you know, the old you know, and Peter, I know in the practices you've been in, you've had to have seen where somebody gets hired, boom, kick to the ass, and then you know, they're handling a hit by car, looking for catheters, looking for, you know, all the kind of stuff, and you're like, you just got to figure it out. And that is as a human being, that's one of the worst ways that we can be put into a situation to learn, even though unfortunately a lot of us did do that early on, but it doesn't make it right. Peter?
Well, it's interesting, and I'll go to Kelly before I jump in, because I want to address the conversation you just had. But Kelly, you add people, but everybody on your team is virtual.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you have an even more difficult onboarding and orientation process, because you can't get body language. You can just and you can barely get eye contact from that standpoint. So how do you integrate people into your team when you're not even in the same state most of the time?
No, and some people I've actually never met in person, to just throw that little layer on top of it, right? We lean heavily on our tools. So every team member has a Zoom account. So everybody is like, hey, do you have a minute? You can just like jump on a Zoom and have these face-to-face, quote, quote, face-to-face conversations. And we use Slack a lot, and we do use the buddy system a lot. But what we have figured out is how to mimic human behavior that happens in an in-person office in the Slack world. So we have different channels for different types of conversations, including just like water cooler talk. Now, Peter, with that said, not everybody makes it. Not everybody is like, some people are like, wow, I do want this lifestyle. And then it turns out they're like, yeah, no, I don't. I need to go back to an in-person situation. And no judgments. We just are like, let's call it, let's help you transition to your new place. Let's make it an easy passage. So it's interesting. And also in our world, and probably also with Beth and all you guys, I was going to throw out there, it's when you can train right and you have your runway to success inside your business, whatever that is, in that process, it works really great. But we don't always get that luxury. What if all of a sudden somebody can't be anymore here at our business anymore for whatever reason, and we have a hole to fill and we need to put somebody in right away, and there's clients, then you need things, and that training gets shorted, right? Then that's really stressful on, like you said, Phil, on everybody. But yeah, you can do it virtually. You just have to be very mindful. And we do have an onboarding team like Beth does, where people shadow, where you move along, where you can ask questions, where you're buddied up all the time. Mm-hmm.
So for full transparency to all of our listeners and watchers, we onboarded Beth in about 2 minutes.
If we onboarded her for 2 minutes. Yeah.
I think that's being generous. I was like, oh, okay, we're recording. Great. I'm ready. I don't know what's going to
I'm
happen, but
here.
I'm ready.
So like the classic veterinary hospitals, not the unicorn that Beth is and the unicorn that Kelly is, but like most veterinary hospitals, we set Beth up to fail. Um,
Deep end of
now,
the swimming pool. Here we come. Yep.
yes, and Kelly, you and I can relate to the swimming pool.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting is how everybody went to the impact on the individual. And I want to talk about the impact on the team by adding somebody new. Because when you add somebody new, you've got a rhythm, you've got a way of doing things with your group. 60 people in Beth's case, 25 in my case, 2 people in Phil's case, whatever the case may be. But you've got a rhythm. And then all of a sudden, you throw a new person into the rhythm. And it's not about just orienting that person because the team expects a new person is going to make things run more smoothly. It doesn't work that way. You go from performing to now you've got a group of people who have to get together and learn about each other and engage with each other and deal with different personalities and different beliefs and all sorts of different things. And now we have to reform the team with somebody new on it, which actually drops because there's a storming period where this team is learning how to work together, unless we throw Beth under the bus, for example, as we did today, and make things challenging. So you go from performing to reforming to storming, and then it takes time to normalize and get back up to performing. And it's called the Tuckman curve, Tuckman curve. And you can see how when you add somebody in a really busy time of the year thinking it's going to help, it actually hurts. The best time to add people is when it's slow, so you can slowly go through the forming, performing, norming, and back into performing. But we tend to be reactive and hire anybody who can fog a mirror and has a pulse because we're always in need. And we go through storming all the time in veterinary hospital. I mean, it's like Pennsylvania for the last 4 months. You've had nothing but snow for the last 4 months, and you're storming, just trying to get everybody to get into work from that standpoint. But the impact on the individual also has an impact on the team and the team dynamic. And this is where leaders are made or broken, is the ability to get quickly from forming and storming back into norming and into performing. It's not about hiring somebody. It's about integrating them into the team to work together in a collaborative fashion and stop setting people up to fail. We do it all the time.
And it's hard, Peter. So, like you were saying, we hire in crisis. Well, partly that's because nobody wants to pay for somebody in the slow time. You know, Beth, if you have a 4-week training period, you're not earning money off that person seeing individual clients. So you're putting an upfront cost to benefit your future work program, right? And so as a business owner, you look at that and go, well, is that an opportunity cost? Is that something that's going to benefit me? When do I get that back? Do I have slow times? Can I find somebody? You know, that's been a big deal too, is finding somebody to fit that slot for it. And I'm going to say with the storming stuff, even virtually, it can get bumpy, you know, because people have feelings about the disruption and feelings about the change. And then you have to sit down and have one-on-ones about them and find out what those feelings are and figure out how to navigate those feelings to get everything smooth again. So it's the same virtually as in person. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, like from the cultural aspect of the team, because I find that my practice, our team is very close knit, even though we're pretty large. Like we have a really nice culture and they all get along really well. But like for a new person coming in, that's super intimidating. And then also for the team, like they're not always the most accepting of new people. So I feel like that's like a really scary part of coming in, which I see all the time because like you were just saying, Kelly, like I have to sometimes sit down and be like, can you give this person a chance before you're like judging them and, you know, making up stories in your head of the type of person they are when they've only been here for like a hot minute. Like, I feel like that is definitely like, even if you talk about it from more like the cultural impact, teamwork impact side, like that's a huge part of integrating a new person that can be really, really challenging. And even the most amazing, like say you're adding a new nurse and their skill set is amazing and they come with a fantastic background, but they're not a cultural fit, like that person might still fail hard, even though they're like on paper an amazing person, which just adds a whole nother layer of complexity of adding a new person to the team.
Yeah, and we have to hire for culture being virtual. We're like,
We do too.
teach skills, you know, especially in the marketing world, we can ramp up your skill set. But if you can't handle the online cultural world and what we expect, like we had somebody that lasted 2 weeks here, and we were like, you need to talk more. Like we talk all day long in Slack. We're actually closer than a lot of physical businesses because we talk all the time. And she said, well, you need to talk less. And I'm like, what? And she goes, we need to talk less. Turns out she was trying to work 2 jobs and was trying, we called her out on it because we were expecting her when we ping her in Slack, we expect an answer back within a certain time frame. I mean, that's part of our culture and our rules. It's just like if I walk up to you in the office, you don't turn your back on me and walk away. You have a conversation, right? Yeah. Interesting stories. I have stories too, Phil. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate Beth's talk about culture, because the t-shirt that every new hire from a prior veterinary hospital should have or wears is, that's not how we did it at my prior practice. And the minute you say that is the minute you have completely broken down the culture and the relationship. But every freaking person we hire who worked in another hospital has something to say about that's not how we did it before. And so if we were to ever onboard somebody, the first thing I would tell them is, I don't care how you did it before, this is how we do it here. And it actually goes back to the prior conversation we were talking about efficiency, because if you have systems and processes that you operate under, every new hire is going to be doing things the same way. But when somebody comes in and has a mindset of how they did it someplace else, and you allow them to integrate that, they become even more disruptive and your storming period gets even longer.
And do we have an appropriate amount of time to onboard that person? Because what happens when we hit a stressful bit is I'm going to revert back to the stuff that I can do like this. And that is a, not survival, but that is a stress response. Is that, you know, what happens when, you know, we're trying to implement like a new treatment or, you know, something in, you know, in the hospital, and then an emergency comes in. We may not go, oh, weren't we gonna try that new drug, or weren't we gonna try, you know, doing that? No, just get me the thing. I know how to do that. Is honoring that as human beings, it is a stressful change management, because that's what's happening for that new person, is that we need to be able to support them, you know, going into that. And so, yes, we can say, oh, that, and it's not right, it's not wrong, but honoring that, yes, there's different ways to do things. Here's why we do it here. You know, and we're giving them appropriate time to learn how to do that, because like Yoda says, they have to unlearn what they have learned. And that's going to take that as a human element, that's going to take time for us to, you know, to do that. And so that's, and I'll say this before we close. One of the things that was interesting at our hospital is I noticed we had a lot of turnover in kennel, and which is, you know, it's a challenging position. However, we didn't like, I wouldn't know. We would have somebody working in the kennel, and like 3 weeks later, I was like, who's that person? And they're like, oh, we hired them, you know, 3 weeks ago. I'm like, why didn't we get to meet them? You know, why, you know, is that somebody comes on the medical team, we're asking them questions, we're trying to connect with them, we're trying to make them feel at home, but we weren't doing the same thing. And we were blaming it on, oh, it's just, you know, it's a lower paying position. It's like, there's a lot of, rich meaning and purpose to working in the kennel. I think most of us did that. But what we didn't do was tell them how important that job was, why what they did was vital. It was, they came in, they didn't get introduced to the whole team, they didn't feel like they were part of the hospital. And all the feedback they got was all the stuff they were doing wrong. And it's like, at 18, you may not have ever mopped the floor before. Like, I specifically remember when I was 16 and I had the mop and I didn't like, I remember, wow, like I'm holding this mop and I'm like, I've never actually mopped the floor before. And I asked, and it was that long ago, I asked, I'm like, how should I do this? And I got laughed at. And it's, and I figured it out, but that was a minute ago, that I was 16. So, but I still remember that experience. And so again, just saying, are we doing for all parts of the hospital, not just maybe the most income generating positions? Are we doing that across the board, to your point, Peter, about, consistency and policies and that type of thing?
Peter, why don't you wrap us up for today?
Okay, couple of quick thoughts. Number one, why have we as a profession focused on mentoring just doctors when we really should be mentoring the entire veterinary team? So we joked, I said earlier, we set up people to fail because we do. Veterinary hospital team, like Beth's and Phil's and mine, and in a business like Kelly's, are like a pack of animals. And when a new animal comes into the pack, well, I'm not suggesting we go around and sniff their butts, but that's what frequently happens to integrate people, and it's building trust. So as much as we focus on onboarding the individual, what we really need to do is onboard the group. And we need to have a system in place to expeditiously go from forming and as quickly as possible through storming so we get back to performing. And so it really is making sure you have this in mind and thinking through the process, because we in the veterinary medicine world tend to hire out of desperation and don't think through the process. We don't plan. So part of creating systems in your practice should be is how can you hire correctly, onboard correctly, orient correctly, and train correctly to set up people to win and set up the entire team to get back up to performing as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And with that, we will wish you all adieu, and we will see you next time on Unfiltered Vet Discussions. Have a great day.